All right, hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Going Headless, an Enterprise Strategy for E-Commerce Growth. So my name's Sean, I'm Event Marketing Manager here at Mobify, and I'll be your host. So just a few items to note before we get going. Don't worry about taking notes yourself. We will email you a recording of this webinar after we've finished. Secondly, please do feel free to ask questions at any point during the webinar. There is a Q&A panel on your Zoom meeting. If you pop your questions in there, we'll aim to answer them all at the end of the webinar. So we're very excited for this opportunity to partner with eSpirit, and I'm thrilled to introduce to you our speakers for today. So we have Sebastian Glock. He is VP of Product Marketing at eSpirit, and we have our very own VP of Product, Drew Lau, from Mobify. So yeah, without further ado, I would love to pass things over to Drew to run over our agenda today and get things kicked off.
Great. Thank you, Sean, and welcome, Sebastian, to this webinar with me. So agenda today, we will be covering what is headless, if this is a new concept to you, from either content or commerce perspective. Sebastian will be getting into a lot of the details of what headless is and why it's important. We'll be covering how to drive agility and digital transformation via a headless architecture. We'll cover the impact headless will have on teams and end users, i.e. your shoppers. We'll also talk about what barriers to adoption you can expect if you are looking at headless strategy. And finally, we'll talk about what options we have for front ends, followed by the Q&A section. So we're going to go straight into the headless section, but first we're going to cover who we are. If you are unfamiliar with either of us as companies, I'll start first. Mobify has been around since 2007. Our mission has stayed the same over the years. We're here to help brands deliver amazing commerce experiences to everyone. You may know us in the past from our focus on mobile. We have been a pioneer in MDOT, responsive web, adaptive technologies, and we've continued that leadership into the era of progressive web apps and accelerated mobile pages. However, we are now positioned as a front-end as a service, which we will talk about in a little bit more depth today. Overall, in the last 2 years, we've been a market leader in enterprise progressive web apps. We've launched over 25 of them, including a lot of complex multi-brand, multi-region deployments, which cover a large set of integrations, including content management systems. All the projects are delivered by a large network of system integrators, and overall, we've driven over $1 billion of gross merchandise value via our front-end service, and we're projecting that to double in the 2019 timeframe. So over to Sebastian for a eSpirit overview.
Thank you, Drew, and also welcome to everybody from my end. I'm Sebastian. I work with a company called eSpirit, and we're making a digital experience platform. Our mission is to enable marketers, e-commerce managers, and IT to create and deliver personalized, content-driven digital experiences with ease on any channel, and all of that with the aim to delight their customers, drive business, and outperform competition. So we've been around quite a bit. We were founded in 1999. Our international headquarter is in Lexington, Massachusetts. I'm calling in from the global headquarter, which is in Germany, as you may hear by my accent. We have worked with much more than 1,000 brands in over 10,000 projects. So what we do is we really focus on content-driven experiences, and our core offering consists of 3 main components. Number 1 is first-bird content management. That is kind of that's our roots. That's where we're coming from, content management on an enterprise level. So we bring in all the capabilities that are needed to orchestrate and manage content on a really large scale. And the other 2 components are the intelligent content engine, that is our capability to do AI-driven personalization. So that includes web optimization, behavioral messaging, A/B testing, and all of that. And the third component is First-Bird Anywhere, which bundles all of our omni-channel marketing capabilities. So this is all about getting content out to the variety of touch points that users come across their user journey in everyday life. So around that is what we call a layer of interoperability. We come up from kind of a best of breed world where we designed our product from the very beginning to play nice with others. So the aim of this is that our customers can plug our tools into their digital ecosystem. They can combine it with whatever is necessary to be successful, so that at the end they can create a unique, optimized digital experience ecosystem that has content-driven experiences at the center. I'll cover the first part of this presentation. I'll talk about what is headless, and I would like to start with the question, why should marketers at all care about software architecture? Because headless in its essence is really a software architecture topic. It's not something that marketers usually deal with. They leave that to CIOs or to software engineers, but with headless it seems to be a bit different. It has gotten a lot of traction in the marketing space, and I want to explore a bit the reasons of why it is getting so much attention and why that attention is actually justified. So what has changed from the marketer's perspective recently? What do they need to focus on? So number one is they need to connect to new touch points, and they need to do that without creating content silos. So new touch points have been around for quite a while, but what we see with our customers is that a lot of those new touch points go from experimental or proof of concept to daily routine. They become daily business. And I see that also in my personal life when, for example, voice interaction, when I brought home the first Google Assistant to my house, it felt a bit weird talking to that machine. But right now, already only 2 years later, it's really gotten part of my everyday life. I use it every single day. My wife does the same, and also my 4-year-old daughter. For her, it's the most natural way to interact with a computer. So that is just an example for one of those new touch points that's getting more and more space in everyone's natural daily lives. And the marketers have to make sure that they will be able to tap into the power of these new devices and touch points. Secondly, evolving customer requirements. That is also not something that just happened yesterday, but we see that it's really getting up a lot of traction. And my favorite example here is the B2B world. Quite a while ago, it was absolutely perfect and all right to have an online catalog that didn't have to be very user-friendly, as long as you could click and select products and add them to the basket and buy them in a B2B environment. That was okay because it was much better than what was there before in B2B commerce, which was the fax machine, right? So that was already an improvement. But right now, today, we see that millennials have become the majority of B2B buyers, or the majority of B2B researchers. And they are, in their lives, also B2C consumers. And they kind of transpose their experiences and expectations as consumers to their work environment. They expect content-rich, relevant, and convenient experiences as consumers, and they do the same in their work life. And third, our marketers need to cope with increasingly complex digital experience ecosystems. We see today that instead of a small number of core components, that digital experience ecosystem is growing and growing. And I think Gartner researched that the average marketing stack, digital marketing stack of a B2C organization has over 20 distinct products. And all of these somehow need to be connected and synchronized. Just as an example, if you decide to get a chatbot on your website to help with consulting customers, asking questions, getting them into the sales funnel, the chatbot can only do a good job if it knows your content. And it shouldn't sit in a separate silo, because that will put a lot of pressure on your business users, having to manage content in two places. Because after all of this complexity needs to be managed by us human beings. And all of that makes puts a lot of pressure on today's marketers, and technology is hopefully there to help them. In this complex world, the traditional approach of content management is no longer a good fit. And I want to just spend one quick slide for context to explain how CMS architecture traditionally used to work. There's a CMS, or digital experience platform backend, that is there to manage the digital experience. This is where content is created and orchestrated, where the peer review happens, and all the kind of low-level stuff that needs to happen in a CMS. And the second component is the front end. It's also called head or delivery tier. And both of these components come typically from the same vendor. So you see that these are in this dotted box. So they are kind of decoupled. They live physically on different servers, but they are essentially the same product. And the front end that is there to deliver the digital experiences to the end user is baked in, it's intertwined with the back end. And it's really hard to make changes in one of these components without having to change the others. And these are the big disadvantages or risks that come with this traditional architecture. It is a monolithic design where everything is baked in and intertwined. Content, design, and experiences are very hard to separate. And at its core, this is a solution that is really designed only for one purpose, and that is to run a website. And it can be good at that. But as soon as those requirements change, that architecture makes it very hard to stay successful. That is exactly where Headless CMS comes into play. And here's what it does. The basic principle is super simple. Again, we have the CMS backend where the preview happens, where the business users work. And the second component here, most manufacturers or vendors call that content as a service, or CaaS. That is a microservice for content. So it is an interface that can deliver content fragments to any other machine, to any other system that's asking for content fragments. So technically speaking, it's a RESTful content API. It's an industry standard for exchanging data between systems. Completely decoupled from that, there is the front-end application, and that no longer sits in this dotted box. That can be any programming language, it can be any vendor, it can be any environment, any physical hardware or any software that is fetching the content from CMS, and it can do its best to present that content to the outside world. So what we see is we have a very clear division of labor where the user experience code lives only in the front-end application, and that is developed completely independent from CMS. So it's much easier to make a change in the front end without having to touch the back end simultaneously. So if you ever get to write a test on what Headless CMS is, this is kind of the textbook definition. It's a decoupled architecture plus the REST API for exchanging data. That is what we call headless architecture, or in our case, a Headless CMS. Doing all of that with one front end, that can in itself already be beneficial, but it really becomes powerful when you look at more touch points. So right here in this diagram, you see that there's the website, there's also a mobile application or a PWA, there can be a shop, digital signage, voice assistants, or anything else. All of these can fetch content from the content as a service interface. And what is important is that all these front ends, they fetch the content based on the exact same integration approach. So if you decide to add a new touch point, which has become important within your customer's journey, you do not have to touch the backend. You don't have to create a new CMS. You essentially can tap into the same interfaces and expose that content to the new touch points. And also, you can use different technologies for each of these touch points, and you can use what works best for the touch points and have separate teams working on those. And with our customers, what we learn is that alone makes it much easier to staff projects, because you no longer need experts who have CMS know-how and touch point know-how and know how to manage a monolithic application, but you can have specialized teams working only on touch points, making updates to the user experience much faster. There's a number of other factors that drives the headless hype, and I just want to quickly mention a bunch of these. One is mobile apps. We've had them before. Some of our customers, they have even gone so far to say that my desktop website has the second priority. So it's even beyond mobile first. They say, we don't care so much about the user experience in the browser. What is important for us is that the apps works just beautifully. Like I said earlier, an headless approach works great with kind of this mobile application first approach. Progressive web apps, that is a topic that we're going to hear more of later. That is the second biggest driver of this hype. In my eyes, it's even more important than the first one. Progressive web apps, they kind of bridge the world between web or mobile web and the app experience. It's kind of best of both worlds. It has benefits for the end users, but also has a lot of benefits for organizations who want to tap into the power of PWAs. They can save a lot of work, reduce redundancy in their code bases, and so on, and create great user experience, PWA based. And we're going to hear more about that later, like I just said. Third one, that is more a technical aspect. There's a lot of ready-to-use frameworks. You might have heard some of the buzzwords that are around, like React and Vue or Angular. all of those are kind of libraries for programmers, shortcuts to create user experience, and many of these are just optimized for headless CMS, and that can be a tremendous driver for a short time to market and agility. But agility, that is the killer argument. That is what I see as the focus of why headless is so great. It is really supercharging agility, and I want to show you on one slide why I think that makes such a big difference. We've seen customer-facing front ends before. They can span from the web experience up to, let's say, packaging inserts. So that's kind of an analog artifact that you can also power from a digital experience platform or from a CMS. But what you also see, what is not so visible though, are the mission-critical backend systems. So that is where your business users work. And like I said earlier, it's typically more than one. And we, as a CMS vendor, we would love the idea of being the center of the universe. You know, everything is content and everything circles around content. But in reality, that is not how our customers operate. For them, content management is one subsystem of many. There's the shop engine, there can be the CDP, there's the product database, there can be legacy application, homegrown applications. All of those systems are equally important, and all of them need to be available, to be up and running in order to create the best experiences at the front end. So what the headless architecture now does is it puts kind of an abstraction layer between the backend and the front end. So instead of having to integrate everything with everything, there is kind of a handbook for APIs that can be leveraged from all of these backend applications. And the people designing the user experiences at the touch points, they can virtually look at that handbook and tap into the power of those APIs to create great user experiences. And that decouples creating user experiences from the backends and vice versa. So you could, for example, run a user test on the web shop, or you could update the product database, or you could create a team that has a new idea in packaging that needs content. And you can try those ideas in short iterations, in short sprints, without having to wait for a huge monolithic application being pushed through a major relaunch. So in the old world, some of our customers would only launch their front end, would only update their front end 3 or 4 times a year, because there was so much effort into developing and testing and then kind of lifting the whole monolithic block up from one major version to the next. But today, everyone wants to step away of that. People rather want to have hundreds or thousands of updates a year, and you can only reach that through decoupling backend systems and front-end touch points. That gives you a lot of flexibility in terms of when you update what, in terms of how fast you can update user experiences. And that is what I think really drives the headless hype from kind of an organizational and management perspective. So like we said earlier, you're going to get the slides later, so I'll quickly sum up the business values of why is headless architecture so great, what is in for our customers, what's in for you. Number one, it enables content for any channel today or in the future, and it decouples back-end and front-end tools technically, but also in terms of the skill set, which makes it easier to staff those projects. We see a much faster time to market for updating the user experience. We can also step away from big bang waterfall style relaunches and instead go with this microservice approach where small incremental improvements are being made. Everything is data-driven and evidence-based. And lastly, it's the perfect setup for agile organizations. That can really help you become a faster player in digital business. So to conclude my section, I want to look at 2 success factors for headless content management. And that is specifically from the business user's perspective. What should you pay attention to when you decide for a headless approach? One aspect is the context of the user experiences that are created. In the old world, as you might remember from the first architecture drawing, CMS owned backend and frontend. That was one monolithic block, so that was easy to have context. But now we're seeing a world where content is not really standalone, but it is embedded in other pieces of content coming from other backend and front-end tools. And all of that is kind of nested into each other. So that can be a very complex experience in the front end, even though it is seamlessly embedded from the end user's perspective. That doesn't just happen on one channel, it can happen on multiple channels. So how does a business user keep control over the content in a decoupled and headless environment? One solution that we propose is let the front end, one or more than one of the front ends, be the user interface. And that is a very revolutionary approach compared to classical content management. Because what we do is we take that live user experiences as the source of record, as the source of truth, and we help our customers to insert just one line of JavaScript into that live application. And with doing that, the business users see the same as the end users, but they have it enriched with content management capabilities. So there would be, let's say, the content management cockpit with versioning and the history of the page, workflow management, all of that. Also backend integrations like your media asset management, whatever is relevant for creating digital experiences in your case. And when a business user takes their mouse, hovers over the screen, all the elements that are really CMS powered, they would be highlighted and they could easily be updated and published to the outside world to update the user experience. So it's all about intuitive use, about usability, and about making business users' life really easier. In reality, like we said earlier, there's often more than one touch point. So this approach is not limited to one. This kind of turn front end into user interface essentially works wherever that one line of JavaScript can be up and running. So if you, for example, work in an organization that has some brick and mortar stores where you use digital signage terminals, you could also embed that piece of code into the front end of the digital sign, and any business user could then change, manipulate, orchestrate those experiences. Very intuitive, just like it was a website. Final argument, and that concludes my section here, enterprise class capabilities. That is also something you should have an eye on. Headless is a hype topic. There's a lot of kind of startup-like players out there that have headless capabilities, but in order to scale and to be successful within a large organization, it really makes sense to pay attention to some detail, and that is kind of the commodity features at first that are expected in the WCMS world, but they are not really granted in pure play headless CMS. So things like workflow management that I mentioned earlier, all of that can be mission critical once you really scale the content production. Second aspect is all about growth. What do you need to orchestrate content in order to grow your output to be more successful? There are capabilities like AI-driven personalization. There's automated content creation through natural language generation. There can be something like campaign management that helps you with orchestrating highly complex campaign scenarios and all of that. That is also something that can help you be more successful. And finally, still in this world, it's all about integration. Integration of content into the front end, that is in the nature of headless, but being able to integrate in the back end is also something that can be mission critical for success. And I think that is the perfect transition to hand it over to Drew, because we're speaking of integration today as well, right? Between the First Spirit product and the Mobify product, right, Drew?
Yeah, that's an exciting combination. Sebastian, thank you very much for sharing all that. One thing I did love about your section there was when you mentioned that content isn't necessarily the center of everything. It's a bunch of best of breed systems that are all mission critical. They're all important, working in conjunction with each other. And me coming from a commerce background for many years, I think commerce and the commerce platform was always the center universe in the years past. It was like, we were looking at the Earth was in the middle and everything's rotating around us. And only, I think in the last little bit, we're starting to realize our kind of Copernicus moment where commerce isn't the center. It's not rotating around commerce. Everything has to work in conjunction with each other. And that's refreshing, because that is going to push ahead this architecture as a way to look at that. And from that perspective, a quick question for you. From a content as a service perspective, how many front ends do you typically see your customers powering? From the commerce world, we've always seen maybe one or two. It'd be the web and the native app. But I think coming from a content perspective, you probably have a different view of things. So what is the number of touch points you are supporting usually, and how do you see that growing over the next couple of years as we see more and more of this rollout?
Yeah, I would agree with, in the past, we've mainly seen two touch points, desktop and mobile. But from my experience, how I see the market is, it feels a bit like a tipping point where the number of required touch points is not like slowly increasing, but it's suddenly going from 2 to 3, 4, 6, or 10.
Mhm.
So not all of that must be kind of a new device or something like that, an entirely newly invented touch point. It can also be software or AI that is embedded on the website. So I would see a chatbot on the website as a new consumer of content from a CMS perspective. So it feels like a new touch point from a CMS perspective. For the end user, it's embedded, which is a good thing.
Mhm.
But even beyond website, we see a lot of new and amazing things coming up. And like I said earlier, they're all going from the experimental and POC phase to a productional phase, or productionalized phase. And that's really exciting.
Great. Yeah, I think that's a good segue into the next section. Basically, what we've been focusing on at Mobify has been creating amazing digital experiences, and I think what we're seeing now is as we need to look at experiences across these many touch points, even the new ones that are coming up, the approach that we're seeing to be able to do this effectively is going with the headless kind of architecture itself. So we're obsessed with creating more immersive experiences that have faster performance, more personalization, and just a better user experience, because that's ultimately going to push your business metrics. But we do see a lot of customers looking at how do we do that? Because as you mentioned, looking at the pace of technology and where it's going and where we've come from, that pace is accelerating at quite a different pace than what we've seen in the past. So when we first started looking at the web many years ago for e-commerce, it'd always be about, oh, let's just get a catalog online. Let's go look at a desktop experience. Maybe we'll look at a couple more mobile responsive experiences, and we'll add in the smartphone, the native app. But lately we've seen even in just the last 2 years, the rise of progressive web apps on the web, accelerated mobile pages. We're starting to see more and more voice deployments with Alexa and Google Home and all that. And now we're just starting to also see, as you mentioned, more embedded touch points like chat and augmented reality. And this is now super frequent. So that is going to change shopper expectations. And with that, that's going to also go force teams to look at changing the underlying technology to meet those shopper expectations. And so I think again, going back to the model of, when the commerce platform was the center of the universe, it is now becoming clear that we cannot stay with that model and keep up with these changes in technology and shopper expectations. So what we do see is e-commerce leaders have a choice when they go through a leap in technology and leap in expectations for shoppers, in that you can either re-platform or you can revamp. So if you were to re-platform, you're going to essentially look at throwing away the majority of your stack. Most of it will be kind of integrated into your commerce platform, and you're going to go through a bit of a risky rebuild and hope that, hey, the new system I put in place has enough built in there from an experience point of view so that we can keep up with the shopper. The other option is to do a bit of a revamp, and I can just try to squeeze out more of what I have on my current solutions by just putting in another point solution and maybe trying to do a bit of a redesign. So when that does happen, we just add a bit more complexity to the system. So we're just, and this is natural. This is just organic growth. Every year your organization is going to be challenged to do something slightly different, and you're just going to layer on yet another touch point, yet another integration, yet another way to a shopper interact with you. And if it grows organically in an uncontrolled environment, you end up with a lot of weight. And we just see more and more customers just get slowed down to a crawl, and they now realize, hey, where do I go next with this? So that takes us to I think our theme around agility, and I think we've been talking about that throughout this webinar. And to kick off this section of how Headless drives agility and digital transformation. Question for you, Sebastian. Given this theme that is very much a focal point for both Mobify and eSpirit, how do you measure from a content perspective agility? What does that mean to you when we say agility from your perspective?
Yeah, even more important from our customers' perspective. So
Yeah.
I guess for them, it all boils down to the question, how easy is it to make a change? How much effort is it? And we see customers essentially looking at two different aspects. One is more like KPI based. What's the time to update? How many updates of, let's say, the homepage can we realistically get? What's the shortest cadence for my campaign? Or in a personalization environment, how many personalized variants of an element can I realistically create without putting too much pressure on my business users? The other aspect is also about we call empowerment, and the question, who can do an update? Is it easy for non-technical marketers? Does it involve IT? Can it be, let's say, approved by a user from a mobile device, or does everyone have to be at their desktop PCs or Macs? So these are agility aspects that our customers typically focus on, and those are the benefits that they are looking for when they go into an exploration with us.
That makes sense, and I think what you've talked about there in terms of how empowered am I to make changes, and how easy it is. That I think was fairly reasonable to look at if you're looking at one or two touch points. But as we look at the future, like how are you going to do that across 10 different touch points effectively? I think
Yes,
that's
absolutely.
really what we're looking forward to here. Is okay, we're trying to prepare our customers, our teams to expect a different pace of things, and really I don't think we can look at teams just scaling out by adding more headcount to do it. We have to look at a big change to accomplish that. So from when we talk about headless architecture, what we want to do is really activate the full value of your content management process and capabilities by making sure it's really sitting side by side with your commerce platform. In the past, I think it was natural to either integrate your commerce platform directly into your commerce platform and funnel that functionality through there, or you do the flip model where the e-commerce platform would feed into the CMS platform. That generally was good when you had a single touch point, but what we're seeing now is that isn't going to be the case again as we get into tens of touch points. And really why that is in the past you would have to funnel the capability through your e-commerce platform, and that would mean you'd be limiting the true value you could get out of the content management system. So and that means like a lot of overhead. So if I were to make a change in part of the content management system, I have to reflect that same change in the e-commerce platform, and then I have to go reflect that change on the front end. That's a lot of moving parts, and if they're standing side by side expressed through APIs and it has architecture, you can kind of avoid that overhead of getting a lot of changes out to your shoppers. So that's kind of the first benefit we think of headless, is the ability to stand these systems side by side and not have one system be the center of everything. The other thing we talk about from an agility perspective is looking at how innovation and changes happen at different layers. So if you're from the IT side, typically this would be called two-speed IT or pace layers. From a business user side, it's really how responsive are your teams to getting your changes rolled out. And if you think about the front end side, what's closest to shopper, that usually has a much faster pace of change. I want to experiment and see if I move this part of my checkout flow around, if I put in a different homepage, if I try out different content, that closest to the shopper there has to change a lot more frequently than if I look at changing something more on the back end side. Say when I add in a new business process around giving out free gifts with a given order. That would be a change that doesn't happen as frequently, and therefore you won't expect these systems to change at a different pace. So we can separate them out by having a separate front end from the back end. That means you can empower your teams, Sebastian, as you were talking about, to make lighter, more frequent deployments and try out a lot more innovation on the front end so that you can see what works. The last thing we want to do is also just do a lot of future-proofing. So we expect a lot of retailers to change quite a bit over the upcoming years. We're seeing a lot of pressure on retailers. We're seeing a lot of new concepts, new technologies come into play. And so that means the need for teams to experiment. If you want to go try out, replacing one of your 20 plus marketing tools that Sebastian referenced earlier in this webinar, how impactful is that change? How much does that cost you from a time and skills and budget perspective? The benefit of having a headless architecture is that you can then swap out different systems, try and see if there's a new one that you want to go trial out, and you want to keep your front end experience consistent. In the past, if you were to say re-platform your commerce platform, you would have to throw out everything. So you think about how much knowledge your team has picked up over the last 2 years of just running your commerce platform, all the different A/B tests, multivariate tests, all the user testing you're doing. It's painful to have to be forced to throw that out. So if you can't separate the front end, then you don't have to relearn those lessons. You can retain the knowledge of what really works for your shopper and keep that with you throughout any change in your technologies or your process internally. So that takes us to more of like, what can you expect from an impact on a team perspective, and also ultimately what's your impact on actual shoppers by going through this type of change. So Sebastian, again, another question to you. When you roll out your headless CMS system out to customers, what is the biggest kind of internal change you notice at these customers?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the biggest aspect is really about unifying content silos. So from an organizational perspective, people shift over to work in and from one coherent source of truth or source of record for content. So like you said earlier, exponential growing number of touch points that potentially leads to exponential trouble. It's getting much harder to find in and out, to orchestrate content and deal with complexity. So with the headless approach, our customers really step away from copying and pasting content, but instead find all their assets and manage all their assets in one place. And that is also within the same UI and the same tool set, which is pretty beneficial for non-technical users. And if you think this through, this also has impact from a collaboration standpoint. So instead of individual team responsibility per touch point, headless makes it much easier to work cross-functional teams, changing content and improving the user experience across touch points. So that really can make a huge impact on the organizational structure and on the speed of agility of teamwork.
Okay, so yeah, back to agility again, the ability to collaborate effectively across teams and roles, and also just being empowered with a consistent set of tools, and really having confidence in that you have a single kind of source of truth, which is really important nowadays. So when we look at it from the front end perspective as well, one of the things that we also look at from a technical perspective is organizational performance. So this is some studies that a team called Dora put together about the state of DevOps in 2018, where they're analyzing, from a development perspective, what types of teams are considered elite and what teams are not considered elite, and what impact does it have. So to become an elite performer, generally you will be able to meet or exceed your goals for organizational performance by about 1.5 times. And from a business user's perspective, that means, hey, the ideas I put forward show up in front of my shoppers, my customers, a lot quicker. And that means, I'm better empowered to go meet my goals that we set out, at the start of the year and so on, by making sure that my development teams can become elite performers. So what this practically means is you will see elite teams based on picking the right architecture, the right tools, the right technologies, and the right process, deploy code more frequently, especially on the front end. Again, we go back to, hey, how do we go back to pushing out changes on the front end on that pace layer a bit more frequently? These elite teams are able to deploy code 46 times more frequently than the low-performing teams. And that means that they can also commit code and get it to production 2,500 times faster. So as a business user, what that really means is by the time I request, this new feature, this new enhancement on the user experience, this will show up 2,500 times faster for me because my team has been empowered to do that. So that's really what we're looking for. The other thing we're really thinking about here is, what does that mean in terms of your actual team that you're working with? If you're working with your IT peers, your potentially your SI partner, that means they should be able to deploy on demand, usually multiple times per day. You should be able to see your changes take effect in production in less than an hour. If there is an incident during that deployment, you should be able to roll that back quickly because it is a smaller change and affects less things, and it has a very low change of failure rate. So matching this to kind of customer stories, what we do see is, for our customers, in the past, when they were kind of centered on a commerce monolith, their ability to deploy changes would be, I can only deploy this every 2 weeks at the most, sometimes like as bad as every 3 months. And so if you're thinking about how can I really stay close to my customer and impact the way they experience my brand, if you can only make those changes every 3 months, you're already behind the ball there. And also with that is a level of confidence. So if it takes me 10 hours to roll out production changes, and they tend to have issues where it takes another 5 hours to roll them back, that is really going to impact your ability to do your work as a business team. So it's important that we can provide these teams with the tools and the architecture they need to become elite performers. So what we see on the Mobify side is when we do adopt this headless architecture and separate the front end from the back end, we do see our customers deploying chains more frequently. Now we're seeing deployments happening twice per week instead of every 2 weeks. And generally, we're seeing that as being around 5x more deployments than the previous solutions, and that's great. Our main goal here is to get our customers down to deploying the changes they have, the ideas they have on a daily basis, and to do that throughout the year. I think we're at a point where if you're saying I have code freeze during the holiday season, I can't touch anything, I can't make any changes. That doesn't really make sense anymore, because if you think about the holiday season, that is your most impactful time of the year, and if you can make a small 1% change during that holiday season where most of your revenue comes from, you should be trying to do that. And so if you don't have the confidence to do that, then that is something we need to overcome again by looking at how we can make these teams empowered to do so. So what you can expect for your shoppers, really moving to a headless architecture will let you meet your shoppers where they are. We're past the point where shoppers will only come to your website on the desktop. They're using their phones constantly. They're starting to figure out how to interact with their voice assistant to interact with your brand. And so if you're moving to a headless architecture with headless commerce and content, you should be able to power as many of these touch points as possible. So, and then you can pick and choose. You're no longer constrained by just going from the web out. You can say, hey, for what I want to explore, I want to look at progressive web apps. That's the newest fad. That is a way to have app-like experiences on the web, but also the level of engagement of a native app. So that may be my core focus area because that has the broadest reach. But I may want to then add on native apps for my frequent little shoppers and accelerate mobile pages to look at anyone coming in from my search channel. If I don't have a headless architecture set up for that, then it's hard for me to get the right content into each of these touch points, and it's hard for me to make sure these things stay consistent. I don't want to have a native app experience that looks different than my progressive app experience, because that's going to create a fractured shopper experience, and really shoppers don't really know the difference between your technologies and your channels anyways. So what that means in the long run is you can start thinking about what the user experience is from your customer perspective. I know we're so tuned into data and analytics of what's going on our sites, but really we'd like to think about from a shopper's perspective, is the site easy to use and does it load quickly? And so if you think about it this way, this is an example of how if you're able to deploy every day and make changes to content and the user experience as quickly as possible, then you can see what impact you're having and try to fine tune it on a daily basis. So if you could look at, hey, is the usability benchmarks and the page load speeds, if I could try to make these things improved on a daily or weekly basis, then I can start looking at how can I measure these. And can I look at these metrics in a way that based on a separate front-end layer, can I see a tangible difference in these on a daily basis based on what we call time to task completion. And this is a good example of, if you can make a change all the time, you can get to the point of I can deploy a front end with, say, accelerate mobile pages that loads a lot faster than a traditional website. Roll that into a progressive web app where you can add in a bunch of user experience changes to add a bunch of focus, put in the right content, target the right shopper at the right time, look at how do I add in new patterns like performance filtering, and then adopt the latest single page application techniques around faster subsequent page loads and caching through a progressive web app, and then see if I can quickly add in one-tap payment methods with Apple Pay, Google Pay, and so on, so that I can see if I can push as many customers through that flow as possible. If so, then what we do see is a lot of our headless deployments have much better time to task improvement rates around findability and checkout, where you could see a core shopper task getting to adding something to your cart being 170% faster, or checkout being 24% faster. And that is something that you just don't plan on doing with a kind of a big project. This is like constant fine tuning throughout the actual user experience itself. So that brings us to really our section on barriers to adoption. And this section, I'm kind of curious from the content perspective, Sebastian, when you're looking at rolling out a headless CMS, where do your customers get hung up on first? What's the big kind of barrier they run into the first thing when they consider a project?
Yeah, I guess the first thing is it's all new. So traditional CMS is there for 20 years, and many people that we deal with, they have worked in multiple relaunches over and over. So they know all the pain from this old world, and they ask themselves, so if all of that goes away, what are the new challenges going to be, and where do I start? What's great about the headless architecture is that, like it was stated, I think multiple times in this webinar, it makes it naturally easy to break down problems into more isolated issues. And that is much, much easier than with the old monolithic approach. So where people actually tend to start as a first step is they focus on the front-end experience, because that's what gets the most management attention. How does it look? How does it feel, right? Does it help me do business? And with the headless approach, it's much, much easier to see results early than with any other option. So that is typically where the first attention goes to.
Great, no, thank you for that. And from what we've seen lately is if you are starting with a headless architecture, your default question for us is like, what is the front end? I don't have that coming by default with the systems I have, because they're by definition headless. And so when teams start looking at this one, they have to figure out, okay, where should I start building this front end? So the natural thought process is, hey, let's go build a custom front end. There are technologies and frameworks to do that. So you will typically go out and learn, hey, what's the newest thing on the website, for example, with progressive web apps. So let's go put the team on this. Let's go explore what a PWA is. What are the ins and outs of building a PWA? Once we get a working POC, then we get to the stage where, okay, now I have to go host this somewhere, make sure it scales out to my production loads. I now have to figure out with this new technology, how do I host this? How do I build out the DevOps practices and the site reliability engineering teams? And then we realize, okay, as I look at experimenting with more of these touch points with, say, AMP and diff apps, I now have separate code bases I need to synchronize. And then I have to explore these new touch points that I have to build from scratch. And then I'm maintaining a bunch of these duplicate integrations. I'm calling the content system, the commerce system, from 4 or 5 different touch points. If I change one, I have to change it in multiple places. And then I'm going back to what's going to slow me down as an organizational perspective. So that's where I think Mobify tends to come in is, hey, let's go look at these different options for front ends, because custom building one from scratch is an option, but also you should consider what else we can do here. So from a eSpirit point of view, Sebastian, I'm guessing you see this quite a bit, is when the first question your customers ask is, hey, what option should I have for a front end, and what should I consider? So what's kind of the popular choice, and do you see this changing in the future?
Well, traditionally, looking back at the past 10 years of projects, the past has been dominated either by the traditional approach, where the CMS or DXP owns the front end, or alternatively, the shop owns the front end, and the content is kind of deeply published deeply into the shop engine, so that the shop could truly reign the front end. Today, we see a major shift to this API first approach, where the experience is neither owned by CMS nor by the shop, but created and updated independently. And that is also changing very rapidly. So for us, it feels a bit like a tipping point where from one RFI where that is a requirement, or let's say 10% of RFIs, it went up to almost 90% of RFIs, where we're just looking at those scenarios.
Yeah, no, I think we've noticed the same change in that shift, especially over the last couple months. So as Sebastian alluded to, in the past, we usually would have, based on this Gartner slide, that we usually have the commerce-led approach where you may have a separate storefront, but it wouldn't be using APIs typically. It would be might be deployed in a separate tier, but it would still be integrated in a way where it wouldn't be something you could reuse across additional touch points beyond just the one the commerce platform is powering. The last couple of years, we've seen the rise of DXPs and web CMSs that you would put on top of your commerce engine. But we're also seeing fewer and fewer of those requests, mainly because a lot of those DXP platforms tend to be a bit heavyweight. So if you're spending all this time building and deploying lightweight microservices on the back end, it doesn't make sense to put a heavier weight front end on top anymore. So hence the shift to looking at more custom front ends and kind of an API-oriented approach. Going back to that. So for Mobify, what we focus on is becoming that head to that headless commerce and content system. What we do want to promote is you should consider a front end as a service, which is a single unified front end experience across all these screens, all these brands, all these regions. We do want to give a flexible environment that gives technical teams the ability to build what would be equivalent to a custom solution, but not have to figure out how to do that from scratch. We want to be able to help you operate that and give you the starter kind of components and starter projects for that, but also having someone to help future-proof what that is. The next emerging trend in digital experience technologies will come in the next couple of years. You will see backend changes for you as well, organizational changes. We want to be a place where you can future-proof that instead of having to maintain all of that all at once. So for Mobify, that's what we're gunning for. We want to be that front end of the service. And we do that via what we call our application delivery network, where we want to host your PWA, your AMP site, your native apps in a scalable enterprise-grade cloud solution. So you don't have to build out your own custom public cloud. There is one essentially purpose-built for high-performing front-end applications. We also want to provide a great starting point for developers. Again, empowering these developer teams to be elite performers means giving them the right tools. So we want to provide us with a single code base, the ability to build all these different touch points. And a key focus of those developer tools are looking at the integration architecture. So in this modern world where everything is headless, we want to make sure we have a great way to integrate with API-friendly systems like the content system, personalization, and so on. So you have to make sure that your front end has been built with API integrations in mind, because that will make your projects easier to build and easier to maintain. So that takes us to the end of our content. We're going to go into more of the questions section to see what we have, and Sean's going to help moderate a bit of that for us.
Okay, perfect. Thank you both very much. So we did have a couple of questions come through during the webinar there, so I'm going to shoot them to you both. So one question I have here is, what e-commerce systems, so for example, cart, store, fulfillment, customer support, etc., already are or can be integrated with your systems?
Yeah, that's a good question. From a Mobify perspective, typically we have pre-built connectors to all the major commerce platforms out there with their APIs, and that depends on what's exposed via the commerce system. So if you look at the usual set of them, the cart, the navigation, the search, the checkout, the accounts, the kind of profile manager are usually all pre-integrated as a starting point. What we do see though as something that is a bit different across these is looking at more of the customer service touch points. That's where you're not usually using the commerce system to do that anymore. You'd be using the various kind of service clouds or kind of customer CRM platforms. In which case, then that's another set of integrations that you may run into more at the project level than kind of the pre-built platform level, just because there is a lot more diversity in systems that power that. But yes, great question there.
Okay, perfect. So one of the questions can probably be answered by both of you is somebody's quite interested to get some sort of like real world examples here. So could you both sort of let us know, you can mention or not mention names, but some sort of real world examples of headless in practice?
Yeah, Sebastian and I were talking about this a bit ahead of time, just because we're working on a really exciting project that we can't really talk about too much. But Sebastian, do you want to give a bit of an overview of like this new amazing joint project we're working on and what you expect from that?
Sure, I'd love to. I guess I can say it's one of Canada's largest retailers with more than $1 billion in revenue. And what we do together with Mobify is we create their new end user experience based on Headless CMS plus Salesforce Commerce Cloud. Frontend is going to be provided by Mobify. We're going to have the in-context editing, just like you saw on the slide deck, so that business users at that retailer can very easily work within the front end and update the user experience. We have seen an extremely short time to success with the project setup, which excited not only the customer, but also Mobify and eSpirit. We had a tremendous start with that customer, and I'm really looking forward for one of the next webinars and then being able to present the matching logo to that client.
Yeah, I expect probably our next part 2 of this webinar series with you would be looking at this customer rollout and really some of the benefits we've seen with that rollout. So I'm pretty excited to talk about that when that comes up, hopefully in the next little bit. So look for that in your inbox probably in the next next couple of weeks or months.
Great. I think this is, oh, great. I've just got one more question that's popped through here. So we'll get to this one, and then hopefully we'll wrap up after that. So for customers who are already on web, what would be a path to move forward into apps based on the Mobify platform?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there is a lot changing in this area, which we typically will call kind of hybrid apps. A lot of what the web teams are working on is finding a way to share, what you built in the web, invested in the web, with the various kind of native app ecosystem. So a popular thing over the last little bit has been to take your progressive web app and put it into like a native app wrapper. There are different ways of doing that. For example, the Google team has released recently something called Trusted Web Activities, which lets you convert a PWA to an Android native app and Android APK via a bunch of configuration and a kind of a simplified build process. So that's good if you just want to create a shopping experience with a native app store presence. And you can do the same on the iOS side via various app wrappers, or in our case, like embedding the PWA into a web view as part of your existing native app, for example. So we have a couple customers that have rolled out a React native app previously before working with Mobify. What we've done there is then tucked in a web view that runs the progressive web as part of that React native app. And that's a good strategy where if you want to continue leveraging the native app you've invested in the past, you can just use more of an embedded web view to power that. But if you're looking to build one from scratch, then you would want to look at one of these kind of hybrid technologies that let you kind of generate or wrap a brand new native app around that.
Perfect. Cool. Well, I think this is probably a good point to wrap up today. So yeah, just thank you all so much for listening in and really for sort of sending in some questions for our panel. So we did recently publish a joint post with eSpirit. It's a great summary of what you've heard today from both Drew and Sebastian. So please do feel free to grab this link and check it out. So yeah. But if you do have any other questions, get in touch, either Mobify or eSpirit. 2 email addresses there on the slide. So thanks again for tuning in, and enjoy the rest of your day.